Before mountains learned to pierce the heavens and seas discovered their eternal rhythms, existence trembled on the edge of becoming. In realms where even emptiness had no meaning, primordial forces gathered like storm clouds pregnant with lightning that had never struck. This was the age before ages, when creation itself lay dreaming in the womb of possibility. From these cosmic depths would emerge the greatest saga ever sung, the complete chronicle of Finnish mythology, where heroes forge destiny from starlight and sorrow. Witness Väinämöinen, whose songs birth reality itself, Ilmarinen, the divine smith who hammers worlds from celestial fire, and Lemminkainen, the wild shaman who dances with death and emerges victorious. Here unfold tales of the legendary Sampo, that magical mill whose theft ignites wars between frozen realms and southern kingdoms. These are stories of love that transcends mortality, vengeance that reshapes the cosmic order, and brotherhood tested in impossible quests. The mythic age reaches its twilight, yet its echoes thunder through eternity. In the beginning, before Earth knew the weight of mountains or seas, learned the rhythm of tides, emptiness stretched like an endless breath, held between sleeping and waking. No word existed to name this void, for words themselves lay dormant in the throat of creation, waiting for the first singer to give them voice. Here, in this realm, where neither light nor darkness held meaning, the cosmos gestated in perfect, terrible silence. The primeval depths moved without wind to stir them, vast beyond the dreams of future navigators. These were not waters, as mortals would know them. No salt tang, no foam against shores yet to be born. Instead, they flowed like liquid starlight, heavy with possibilities that pressed against the boundaries of nothingness, like seeds swelling in spring earth. Through these infinite deeps moved Ilmatar, the maiden of the air, her form shifting between substance and spirit as she wandered through eternities. Neither young nor old, for age had no meaning, where time itself remained unborn. She embodied the longing of existence for form, the ache of potential seeking expression. 700 years she floated thus, her mind turning over thoughts that had no names, watching patterns in the primordial sea that revealed mysteries she alone could perceive. Weariness finally drove her to seek rest upon the flowing expanse, her body becoming both vessel and sea. As she floated, the elemental currents cradled her with a gentleness that would later inspire every mother's touch, every lover's caress, every healer's hand laid upon fevered brow. From beyond the edges of the possible came a wanderer whose form shifted between the recognizable and the impossible. This was Luonotar's duck, though to call it merely a duck would be like calling the sun merely a light. Its wings spanned distances that would someday become horizons. Its eyes held depths that would birth the mystery of sacred lakes. Its voice carried melodies that sleeping seeds of future music would remember in their dreams. The duck circled 7 times above Ilmatar's floating form, each circuit drawing tighter the spiral of fate that would bind chaos into cosmos. When it alighted upon her raised knee, the contact sent tremors through the fundamental structure of existence, preparing the void for transformations that would shatter the eternal quiet. 7 eggs the duck laid upon that living altar. 7 ovoids that contained within their fragile shells the blueprints of everything that would ever be. Not ordinary eggs these, but celestial vessels whose shells gleamed with colors that had no names, because rainbows had not yet been born. Each egg pulsed with its own rhythm, creating harmonies that wove themselves into the music that would later guide the spheres in their eternal dance. 6 eggs of liquid silver, containing the cold fire that would become stars, the paths that comets would follow, the dreams that would fill the spaces between worlds. The seventh egg bore different markings, swirls of copper and gold that suggested the warm blood of living things, the glow of hearth fires on winter nights, the precious metals that would tempt kings to madness. As the duck settled into brooding stillness, warmth began to build where warmth had never existed. The heat that emanated from those divine eggs penetrated Ilmatar's flesh, travelled through her bones, and set her very soul aflame with sensation. The burning grew beyond bearing, as if the core of every star that would ever shine had awakened within her knee. She jerked involuntarily, that first movement in a universe that had known only the slow drift of eternity. The eggs tumbled from their perch, falling through liquid depths that suddenly learned gravity, crashing into abyssal spaces that echoed with the first sound of breaking, since silence began its reign. Each shattered shell became a building block of reality. The upper halves became the vault of heaven, that blue dome under which all future dramas would unfold. The lower halves settled into foundations, creating the solid earth. The yolks became the sun that would warm the faces of unborn children, and the moon that would silver the paths of lovers yet to meet. From the white, scattered like powdered stars came the constellations, those patterns that would guide lost travelers home and inspire poets to weave myths around their cold beauty. The fragments that caught between earth and heaven became clouds, learning their first lessons in gathering and releasing, in holding light and casting shadow. But creation demanded more than structure. It required intention, the guiding intelligence that would shape raw possibility into meaningful form. This wisdom lay sleeping in the womb of Ilmatar herself, gestating through centuries of solitude. As the universal architecture settled into its eternal patterns, she felt the stirring of new life within her, the awakening of the one who would complete what the broken eggs had begun. The child that grew within her was unlike any offspring that would follow. Born already ancient with the accumulated wisdom of the void, he possessed knowledge that predated existence itself. His birth cries would be the first songs, his first words, the incantations that would teach stones their names and show streams their proper courses. This was Wainamoinen, the eternal sage, emerging into a realm that awaited his voice to call it fully into being. 7 centuries more passed as he gestated in that divine womb, gathering strength and wisdom for the tremendous labor that awaited him. When birth pangs finally seized Ilmatar, they shook the foundations of the newly formed earth. Mountains trembled in sympathy, rivers paused in their courses, and the aurora borealis painted itself across the northern sky for the first time, celebrating the coming of creation's first child. Wainamoinen emerged not as an infant, but as a man already marked by eternity, his beard white with the wisdom of ages, his eyes deep with the memory of the void from which he came. His first breath drew in the essence of the new world, tasting air that had never filled lungs before, learning the flavor of existence that he would spend his immortal life exploring and shaping. Yet his birth brought him not to solid ground, but to the restless embrace of the flowing expanse. For 7 more years, he floated upon its surface, contemplating the raw materials that surrounded him. This was his apprenticeship in creation, his chance to understand the nature of the elements he would soon be called to command. The liquid realm taught him fluidity and adaptation. The sky showed him the beauty of limitless space. The distant earth whispered to him of the potential that lay locked in soil and stone. During this floating meditation, the 3 realms of existence established their eternal hierarchy around him. Above stretched Kalevala, the upper world where light held dominion and celestial forces danced their appointed rounds. Here dwelt the powers that governed day and night, the entities that commanded weather and season, the spiritual forces that would later inspire mortals to raise their eyes toward heaven in prayer. Below lay Tuonela, the underworld where shadows gathered and the mysteries of death awaited their first visitors. Not yet the grim realm it would become when sorrow entered the world. Tuonela existed in these early days as a place of profound quiet, a necessary balance to the brightness above. Here dwelt the powers that governed transition and transformation, the forces that would teach mortals the value of each moment, by ensuring that no moment could last forever. Between these realms lay Kalevala, the middle world that would become the stage for all the dramas yet to unfold. Here, earth and liquid mingled in combinations that would nurture life, where air currents would carry the songs of birds not yet born, where seasons would learn their ancient dance of death and renewal. Connecting all three realms stood the world tree, vast beyond any scale that would ever be devised, pulsing with life that flowed between the worlds like blood through divine veins. Its roots delved deep into Tuonela's mysteries. Its trunk rose through Kalevala, with the majesty of a column supporting existence itself, and its crown spread through Paivola like a canopy vast enough to shelter all the stars. The flowing element revealed its sacred nature as the primordial source from which all life would spring. Not merely the physical substance that would later fill lakes and rivers, but the spiritual essence that connected all things in an invisible network of relationship. Every drop contained within it the memory of the primordial ocean from which it came, the potential to support life in forms that imagination had not yet dared to conceive. As Wainamoinen floated upon these elemental currents, feeling their stories seep into his consciousness, he began to understand his role as creation's first shaman. His would be the task of naming what had been born nameless, of teaching the elements their proper relationships, of establishing the patterns that would guide existence through all the ages to come. The first songs stirred in his throat as inspiration flowed through him like honey mixed with lightning. These were not the words of any language yet spoken, but the fundamental sounds from which all languages would later spring. Each syllable carried creative power. Each phrase established new realities. Each verse completed another aspect of the cosmic design. When he finally sang his first true song, the effects rippled outward through all the realms. In Paivola, stars that had hung motionless began their eternal dance. In Tuonela, shadows found their proper places in the pattern of darkness that balanced the light above. In Kalevala, flowing streams suddenly knew their courses. Earth felt the first stirrings of life within its depths. The song called forth the winds from their hiding places, teaching them the paths they would follow through all the seasons to come. Mountains rose at his command, thrust up from the earth's depths by forces his voice awakened. Valleys carved themselves between the peaks, creating sheltered spaces where life could take root and flourish. Forests began to sprout from seeds that his song scattered like blessings across the newly formed earth. Each tree species learned its own nature, the mighty oak that would become the symbol of strength, the graceful birch that would provide bark for the first written words, the towering pine that would sing bass notes in the wind's symphony. Animals emerged from the dreams that life had dreamed during its long gestation. The bear, mightiest of all creatures, would become the symbol of primitive strength and shamanic power. The swan would embody grace and beauty, its white form cutting through dark waters, like hope moving through despair. The eagle would rule the sky, its keen eyes seeing truths that earthbound creatures would miss. As this vast project of creation neared completion, Wainamoinen felt the pull of solid ground calling to him from across the waters. swimming towards shore with powerful strokes. He felt the weight of responsibility settling upon his shoulders. His feet touched solid ground for the first time, and the earth trembled with recognition of its first conscious inhabitant. Standing upon the shore between water and land, Wainamoinen raised his voice in the song that would complete creation's first phase. This was not a song of calling forth, but of blessing, not a command, but a benediction. His words flowed over the landscape like gentle rain, sanctifying what had been made, establishing the harmonies that would govern relationships between all the elements he had awakened. The song named each mountain and valley, each river and lake, each forest and meadow. But these were not arbitrary labels. These were true names that captured the essential nature of each place, words that would hold power as long as the world endured. Sacred sites emerged where his song fell with particular intensity, places where the boundary between realms grew thin, and mortals would later come to seek visions and guidance. As the blessing song drew to its close, creation settled into the patterns that would guide its development through all the ages to come. The cosmic architecture was complete, the fundamental relationships established, the stage set for the dramas that would follow. Stars wheeled overhead in their newly established patterns, each one a promise of stories yet to be told. The moon began its first cycle, teaching mortals the rhythms by which they would measure their lives. The sun prepared to rise for the first time over a world ready to receive its light. The eternal sage stood thus upon the threshold between primordial chaos and ordered cosmos, between the realm of pure potential and the world of actualized reality. Behind him lay the void from which he had emerged. Ahead stretched the infinite journey of creation's continuing work, the endless labor of shaping raw possibility into meaningful form. As creation's first dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with colors that had never before illuminated any landscape, Wainamoinen prepared to greet the companions who would share his labors and multiply his accomplishments. The world was ready for heroes, ready for the adventures that would test the strength of what he had built, ready for the songs that would celebrate both triumph and tragedy in the eternal human drama that was about to begin. Dawn breaks over the newly formed world with light that has never before touched any surface, painting the virgin landscape in hues that exist only in this moment of first illumination. Wainamoinen stands upon shores still wet from creation's birth, feeling the weight of infinite possibility pressing against his consciousness like a tide of pure potential. The earth beneath his feet pulses with life yet to be awakened, while the air trembles with melodies that wait for a voice skilled enough to call them into being. His first song, as master of the solid realm, rises from depths deeper than any well, more ancient than the mountains that pierce the morning sky. This is not the tentative humming of a novice, but the confident voice of one who has heard the fundamental harmonies upon which all existence rests. Each note that flows from Wainamoinen's throat carries the authority of creation itself. Each phrase reshapes reality according to patterns that his eternal wisdom has perceived. Where his voice touches the landscape, transformation follows like spring after winter's long retreat. Barren hills burst into flower as seeds that have waited since the world's birth suddenly remember their purpose. Rivers that flowed without destination discover their proper channels, carving paths through stone with the patience of flowing streams that know time has no meaning for those who serve eternal purposes. Forests spring up in the wake of his words, each tree understanding its role in the great symphony of existence. The power that flows through these early songs reveals itself as something far greater than mere magic. It is the capacity to speak the hidden names of things, to call forth the essential nature that lies sleeping within every element of creation. This is the ancient art of the Tia Taija, the knowing one, whose voice can reshape reality, because it speaks with the authority of one who has witnessed the birth of all that is. When Wainamoinen names a stone, that stone remembers what it truly is, and becomes more itself than it was before. When he calls to the wind responds not as servant to master, but as student to teacher, eager to learn the part it must play in the continuing work of creation. Years pass in this labor of awakening, each season bringing new marvels as Wainamoinen explores the limits of what voice and will can accomplish. He teaches the northern lights their dance across the winter sky, shows the midnight sun how to hover at the horizon during the brief Arctic summer, instructs the aurora in the art of painting hope across the darkness that swallows the shortest days. Under his guidance, the natural world learns to express emotions that mortals have not yet been born to feel. The melancholy of autumn rain, the fierce joy of spring's return, the contemplative peace of snow falling on silent forests. Into this growing paradise comes a challenge that tests both Wainamoinen's wisdom and his patience. From the southern lands where warmth lingers longer arrives Youkahainen, a youth whose pride burns brighter than his understanding. Word has reached him of a singer in the north, whose voice commands the very elements, and jealousy eats at his heart like acid consuming metal. He comes not seeking wisdom, but demanding recognition, not to learn, but to prove himself the equal of one whose accomplishments stretch back to the foundations of time itself. The young challenger strides across the threshold of Wainamoinen's domain, with the confidence of one who has never met a problem his wit could not solve, or his strength could not overcome. His horses prance with the same arrogance that fills their master's breast, their harnesses jingling with ornaments that speak of wealth accumulated through cleverness rather than wisdom. Behind Youkahainen follows a retinue of admirers, whose flattery has convinced him that talent untested by true trial represents mastery worthy of legendary status. Laughter echoes across the northern forests as Youkahainen presents his claims to superior knowledge, boasting of understanding that encompasses everything, from the movement of celestial bodies to the secret names of creation's hidden forces. He speaks with the easy confidence of youth that has read about swimming, but never felt the shock of cold liquid closing over its head. His words flow smoothly, seasoned with just enough truth to make them dangerous and just enough ignorance to make them pathetic, to one who has watched stars learn their courses and taught mountains the art of patient endurance. Wainamoinen listens to these boasts with the gentle amusement of a grandfather watching a child play at being grown. He recognizes in this brash young man the natural pride that drives mortals to reach beyond their grasp, the divine discontent that prevents humanity from settling into comfortable ignorance. Yet he also sees the danger that comes when confidence outstrips competence, when the mouth speaks of mysteries the heart has never experienced. The contest that follows will be remembered as long as voices carry songs across the northern winds. Youkahainen begins with riddles he believes no one can answer, speaking of the creation of the world as if he had been present when the eggs first cracked and released their treasures. His voice rings with certainty as he describes the birth of mountains and the naming of seas, unaware that he speaks to the very one who performed these mighty works. When Wainamoinen responds, his words carry the weight of lived experience rather than learned theory. He does not describe the creation of the world. He recalls it, speaking with the intimate knowledge of one who held the broken shells in his hands and felt the heat of the primal fires as they kindled the first dawn. His voice grows in power as memories flood back, each phrase drawing on wells of experience deeper than any mortal mind could fathom. The true nature of the contest becomes clear as Wainamoinen's voice begins to work its transformation upon reality itself. This is not a battle of words, but a demonstration of the fundamental difference between knowledge gained from books and wisdom earned through participation in the very processes that shape existence. Youkahainen's confident assertions crumble like sandcastles before an incoming tide, as Wainamoinen's song reveals the poverty of second-hand understanding when confronted by genuine authority. Terror replaces arrogance in the young man's eyes, as he feels the solid ground beneath his feet begin to soften and shift. His proud horses sink to their bellies in earth that becomes marshy at Wainamoinen's command, their panicked whinnying adding a note of discord to the melody that reshapes the very substance of the world around them. The sleigh that carried Youkahainen northward with such style transforms into driftwood floating on streams that spring from nowhere to claim dominion over what had been dry land. Desperate now, Youkahainen offers treasures beyond counting. Gold that could buy kingdoms, silver worked by master craftsmen into objects of surpassing beauty, weapons forged with skills passed down through generations of smiths who understood the secret sympathies between metal and fire. Yet these material bribes cannot purchase safety from a power that operates on levels where worldly wealth holds no meaning. Wainamoinen's song continues its inexorable work, drawing the challenger deeper into the bog that his own pride has created. Only when the murky liquid reaches his chin does wisdom finally penetrate Youkahainen's consciousness. In that moment of extremity, when death stares him in the face with the patient indifference of natural law, he remembers what his arrogance had made him forget, that he possesses something more precious than gold, more beautiful than crafted silver. He has a sister, young Aino, whose loveliness puts the morning star to shame, and whose grace makes the swan seem clumsy by comparison. The offer transforms the nature of the contest entirely. Where material wealth could not move Wainamoinen's heart, the prospect of companionship awakens interests that have slumbered through all his centuries of solitary labor. The wise singer pauses in his song, allowing the marsh to recede just enough to remind Youkahainen of his mortality while considering this unexpected development. Here is something he has never possessed in all his eternal existence, the possibility of sharing his immortal days with one whose presence might transform creation's continuing work from duty into joy. Yet the bargain struck in desperation carries within it the seeds of tragedy that will poison the gift before it can be properly received. Youkahainen returns home with his life intact, but his pride forever shattered, carrying news of his defeat like a weight that bends his shoulders and dims the light in his eyes. His sister Aino receives word of her intended fate with the stoic acceptance that her people expect from daughters whose lives are shaped by forces beyond their control. Yet beneath that calm exterior, rebellion stirs like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. Aino possesses her own fierce pride, inherited from the same bloodline that drove her brother to challenge powers beyond his comprehension. She sees clearly the difference between a marriage born of love and mutual attraction and a bargain struck to save a life endangered by foolish arrogance. The thought of becoming merely a prize to be claimed by ancient authority, no matter how powerful or wise, awakens in her heart a resistance that grows stronger with each passing day. When she encounters Wainamoinen by chance in the forest, where she gathers berries for her mother's table, the meeting reveals the impossible chasm that separates their natures. The eternal singer appears to her as aged beyond her ability to comprehend, his white beard and time-deepened eyes speaking of centuries that stretch back before her people's people were born. To him, she represents youth and beauty that could bring freshness to existence grown stale through too much solitary contemplation. The gifts he offers, golden ornaments that catch and hold sunlight like captured fire, silver jewelry worked with skill that surpasses any craft known to mortal hands, speak of wealth beyond her wildest dreams and power beyond her darkest fears. Yet they also speak of a fundamental misunderstanding of what moves the human heart. Aino sees in these treasures not tokens of affection, but symbols of the vast gulf that separates the eternal from the temporal, the divine from the human. Her refusal cuts through Wainamoinen's confidence like a blade forged from winter wind and tempered in the tears of disappointed hope. She tears the ornaments from her hair and throws them at his feet, proclaiming that she would rather die as herself than live as the possession of another, no matter how exalted his status or how great his accomplishments. The words strike him with force that physical violence could never match, revealing the limitations that bind even the mightiest of creation's servants. True to her fierce declaration, Aino chooses death over surrender when escape seems impossible and compromise appears to be her only alternative. She walks into the dark forest that borders her father's land, seeking solitude where she can make peace with the choice that honor demands she make. The trees close around her like curtains drawn across the final act of a tragedy, their shadows swallowing her slight form as completely as if she had never existed. At the edge of a lake, whose liquid surface mirrors the grey sky of her despair, she sees her reflection for the last time and finds it beautiful. This recognition brings no joy, only the bitter satisfaction of knowing that she dies as she lived, free to choose her own path, even when that path leads only to darkness. The depths that claim her body become her monument, carrying her story to distant shores where other young women will hear in the lake's voice an echo of their own struggles against forces that would reduce them to pawns in games they never chose to play. Wainamoinen learns of her fate through the songs of sorrow that rise from every grove and glade where she once walked. For the forest itself mourns the loss of one who chose authenticity over survival. The weight of responsibility for this tragedy settles upon his shoulders, like a cloak woven from guilt and regret, teaching him harsh lessons about the difference between power and wisdom, between commanding elements and understanding hearts. As grief settles in, Wainamoinen looks for peace in the steady hum of creation's unfolding. His voice turns to calling forth new wonders, new companions who might fill the emptiness that Aino's rejection has carved in his heart. From deep caves where patience has accumulated like sedimentary rock comes Ilmarinen, the divine smith whose mastery over fire and metal equals Wainamoinen's dominion over word and song. Where he shapes reality through voice and intention, Ilmarinen transforms it through hammer and forge, through the ancient alchemy that turns raw ore into useful tool and base metal into precious artifact. His workshop echoes with sounds that complement Wainamoinen's songs, the ring of hammer on anvil providing percussion for melodies that reshape the world one note at a time. Together, they represent the twin principles of creation: inspiration and craftsmanship, vision and execution, dream and manifestation. The smith's first great work establishes his credentials as a master of impossible tasks. When the vault of heaven itself requires repair, for even creation's grandest achievements need maintenance from time to time, Ilmarinen applies his skills to forging a new dome that will hold for all eternity. His hammer shapes metal that exists in no earthly mine. His fire burns with heat borrowed from the cores of distant suns. His anvil rings with notes that harmonize perfectly with the music of the spheres. Yet Ilmarinen's greatest creation remains forever beyond his grasp, a testament to the limits that bind even divine craftsmen. in moments of loneliness that mirror Wainamoinen's own solitary brooding, the smith attempts to forge a companion from the most precious materials his workshop contains. Golden wire becomes hair that catches light like captured sunshine. Silver plates form features that achieve mathematical perfection in their proportions. Precious gems provide eyes that sparkle with artificial life. The woman of gold that emerges from his forge represents the pinnacle of technical achievement coupled with spiritual failure. Every detail of her construction demonstrates mastery that no mortal smith could match. Every component reflects understanding of beauty that transcends mere aesthetics to approach divine truth. Yet when the final work stands complete, she remains forever cold to his touch, perfect in every way except the one that matters most. She possesses no soul to warm her golden heart, no spirit to animate her flawless form. This failure teaches Ilmarinen lessons that complement those Wainamoinen learned from Aino's rejection. No amount of skill can create what must be freely given. No degree of perfection can substitute for genuine affection. No mastery of technique can overcome the fundamental truth that love cannot be manufactured, but must be discovered in the mysterious alchemy that occurs when two hearts recognize each other across the vast distances that separate individual souls. From distant lands where adventure calls to those whose spirits cannot rest in peaceful contemplation, comes the third member of the heroic trinity. Lemminkainen arrives like a spring storm, sudden, violent, transformative, and impossible to ignore. Where Wainamoinen embodies wisdom earned through ages of patient observation, and Ilmarinen represents the focused intensity of absolute dedication to craft. This wild shaman brings the unpredictable energy of youth that has not yet learned to accept limitations as permanent fixtures of existence. Handsome beyond the dreams of mortal women, skilled in magic that operates through charm and audacity rather than ancient wisdom, blessed with courage that exceeds his judgment by margins that terrify those who care about his welfare. Lemminkainen embodies the aspect of human nature that refuses to accept that some things cannot be accomplished through sufficient determination and creative recklessness. His mother watches his adventures with the constant anxiety of one who loves someone whose greatest strength is also his most dangerous weakness. The protective charms she weaves into his hair represent more than maternal concern. They embody sophisticated understanding of the symbiotic relationship between blood and spirit that allows families to share strength across distances that would defeat ordinary communication. Each strand carries part of her life force, creating channels through which her consciousness can monitor his welfare, and her power can intervene when his own resources prove insufficient to the challenges he creates for himself. Death comes for Lemminkainen, as it comes for all who push the boundaries of the possible beyond their breaking point. In the dark realm of Tuonela, where shadows gather and the living tread at their mortal peril, he overreaches himself one final time. The ferryman who guards the crossing between life and death shows no mercy to those who arrive before their appointed time, and Lemminkainen's body feeds the black river that flows through the heart of the underworld. Yet death proves to be merely an interruption rather than an ending for one whose mother possesses both the knowledge and the determination to challenge even the fundamental laws that separate the living from the dead. When the warning signs tell her of his fate, she sets out on a quest that will test every skill she has acquired through decades of protective vigilance and every technique she has learned for manipulating the forces that most mortals accept as immutable. The resurrection that follows demonstrates the true extent of maternal love when coupled with sufficient magical knowledge and unlimited determination. Piece by piece, she gathers the fragments of her son's body from the dark currents that scattered them throughout Tuonela's domain. The magic she employs transcends the normal boundaries between healing and resurrection, between medicine and miracle. When breath finally returns to lungs that had forgotten their purpose, and heartbeat resumes in a chest that had known the cold stillness of absolute ending, the victory over death itself sends tremors through the foundations of existence. This is not the natural resurrection that comes with spring's return, but the willful reversal of natural law through the application of love that refuses to accept defeat. Through these early adventures and misadventures, the three heroes establish the dynamic that will drive all their future endeavors. Wainamoinen provides the wisdom that comes from infinite experience. Ilmarinen contributes the skills that transform vision into reality, and Lemminkainen adds the energy that makes the impossible seem merely difficult. Together, they embody different aspects of the creative force that drives existence forward: contemplation, craftsmanship, and action, working in harmony to accomplish what none could achieve alone. The concept of Sisu begins to emerge from their collective example, that uniquely Finnish combination of determination, courage, and stubborn refusal to surrender that will become the defining characteristic of their people. This is not mere bravery, which fades when danger grows too great, nor simple persistence, which yields when obstacles prove insurmountable. Sisu represents the human capacity to continue fighting when hope is gone, to persist when logic counsels surrender, to discover strength that exists beyond the normal limits of endurance. As the second phase of creation draws toward its close, the three heroes stand ready to face the greater challenges that await them in the lands beyond the familiar borders of Kalevala. Their brotherhood, forged in the fires of individual trials and tempered by shared understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses, provides the foundation upon which all future adventures will rest. The world has learned to know these champions of impossible causes, these servants of dreams too grand for ordinary minds to encompass. Beyond the familiar borders of Kalevala, where midnight sun barely touches the horizon and winter darkness swallows the land for months at a time, lies a realm of shadows and bitter cold. This domain embodies chaos itself, the dark mirror of southern harmony, where the very air tastes of mystery and danger. Ancient forests stretch endlessly under perpetual twilight, their ice-laden branches whispering warnings to travelers who venture too far from home. The call to journey northward comes to Wainamoinen, not through prophecy or divine command, but through restless longing that drives all heroes toward their greatest trials. His heart, still bearing scars left by Aino's tragic rejection, yearns for companionship that might heal wounds no song can mend. During the depths of winter nights, when Aurora Borealis paints the sky with otherworldly fire, he hears whispers carried on Arctic winds, tales of northern maidens whose beauty surpasses summer flowers, whose wisdom matches their loveliness. Across frozen wastes stretches the path that leads to adventure beyond imagination. The eternal singer's sleigh cuts through snowdrifts deep enough to swallow houses, pulled by horses whose breath creates clouds that freeze before touching the ground. Ancient trees stand like sentinels wrapped in shrouds of ice, their branches singing funeral songs for travelers who lost their way in previous winters. Wolves follow at a distance, their eyes gleaming like fallen stars, yet they dare not approach one whose voice commands respect from all living creatures. When he travels deeper into northern territory, the very landscape reveals its allegiance to forces opposing Kalevala's principles of growth and harmony. Here, entropy holds court, where ice never fully melts, even during brief summer, where plants struggle to find purchase in soil that seems to resist life itself. Rivers flow backward, stones sing lamentations, and northern lights dance with patterns that spell doom for those who can read their terrible language. Still, The wise hero presses onward until his sleigh approaches a fortress that defies every law of architecture learned through centuries of observation. This structure rises from bedrock like living ice, walls transparent enough to reveal shadowy movements within, yet strong enough to withstand hammering Arctic storms. Towers spiral upward in impossible helixes that seem to pierce heaven's vault, while bridges of frozen wind connect battlements that should collapse under their own weight. Louhi herself emerges to greet her unexpected visitor with terrible grace of winter personified. Neither young nor old, for age has different meanings in realms where time flows according to its own dark logic. She embodies fierce beauty that inspires both awe and terror. Her hair flows like aurora streamers, shifting between silver and green and deep blue that hurts the eyes to contemplate. Her gaze holds depths colder than spaces between stars, yet burning with intelligence that has watched empires rise and fall, like waves upon distant shores. However, the northern mistress understands immediately why this southern champion has braved the perils of her domain. She has heard songs that carry news across vast distances, knows of the tragedy that sent Aino to her death, rather than accept marriage to one whose nature she could not embrace. Yet she sees opportunity where others might perceive only remnants of sorrow. This powerful singer represents a prize worth claiming, an ally whose abilities could tip the balance between order and chaos in directions serving her purposes. The bargaining that follows demonstrates sophisticated intelligence governing the frozen realm. She does not simply refuse his suit or demand impossible payments in gold and silver. Instead, she proposes a challenge, testing not only his abilities, but those of his companions as well. Her price for the hand of one daughter is nothing less than creation of the Sampo, a magical mill unlike anything that has ever existed, capable of producing endless wealth and prosperity for whoever controls its operation. Before accepting this challenge, Väinämöinen recognizes the magnitude of what Louhi requests. Creation of such a device will require skills exceeding even his considerable abilities. Yet he also understands this challenge offers more than a chance to win a bride. It presents an opportunity to forge bonds with companions that will unite them in purpose beyond any oath or ceremony. The quest for this wondrous creation will test everything they have learned about cooperation, determination, and creative power emerging when different talents combine. During the return journey to Kalevala, his mind works through technical challenges the mill's creation will require, while his heart grapples with questions about whether this northern bride will prove different from the southern maiden, whose memory still haunts his dreams. Familiar forests welcome him home with whispered encouragements. Well-known paths guide his sleigh toward workshops, where Ilmarinen waits to hear of adventures in distant realms. The eternal singer presents the northern challenge to his smith companion, whose eyes light up with fierce joy that comes to master craftsmen, encountering projects worthy of their ultimate skills. The magical device represents everything he has trained for through centuries of patient practice, a creation demanding innovations in metallurgy, mechanical engineering, and subtle arts governing relationships between physical form and spiritual function. This is not merely a commission, but a calling, a chance to prove mortal skill can achieve results rivaling the works of gods. The forge that Ilmarinen prepares for this great work transforms his familiar workshop into something approaching sacred space. Ancient bellows, once adequate for ordinary projects, are replaced by devices generating heat approaching stellar core temperatures. Anvils forged from metals existing nowhere in the natural world appear through processes blurring lines between craftsmanship and magic. Tools whose very names are secrets known only to greatest masters emerge from hiding places where they have waited for projects worthy of their capabilities. Materials required for construction demand expeditions to locations where boundaries between realms grow thin enough to permit access to substances existing primarily in legend. Swan feathers that have caught moonlight in their downy filaments provide components enabling the mill to process celestial influences alongside earthly materials. Milk from bears that have never known fear contributes proteins binding spiritual forces to physical mechanisms. The tip of a swan's quill that has written names of unborn heroes supplies precise measurements needed to calibrate gears turning according to rhythms of fate itself. Each component must be gathered according to rituals honoring sources from which they come. His songs create proper atmospheres for negotiations with beings existing partially outside normal reality. His voice opens pathways between worlds, establishes communications with entities whose cooperation is essential for success, and maintains delicate balances preventing such powerful forces from destroying everything they touch. Through 7 days and 7 nights, the divine smith labors without rest, his will focused entirely on bringing order to materials resisting every attempt at organization. What slowly takes shape under his hands defies easy description. Part machine, part organism, part crystallized song. Its grinding mechanisms incorporate principles, allowing it to process abstractions alongside physical substances. Collection chambers are calibrated to store not merely grain and salt and gold, but accumulated blessings flowing from prosperity properly distributed. After the work reaches completion, this masterpiece stands revealed as validation of every hour spent perfecting the craft. The device hums with internal energies, suggesting perpetual motion, achieved through perfect balance rather than violation of natural law. Grinding stones, carved from materials existing at intersections of dream and reality, turn with precision, making mortal timepieces seem crude by comparison. Every surface bears decorations shifting and changing as light touches them from different angles, telling stories chronicling humanity's long aspiration toward abundance and security. Testing reveals capabilities exceeding even the northern ruler's ambitious specifications. Grain flows from chambers in quantities sufficient to feed entire populations, each kernel perfect in development and carrying concentrated nutrition, sustaining life through harshest famines. Salt emerges in crystals whose purity surpasses anything found in natural deposits, its preservative qualities enhanced by processes seeming to slow time's advance. Gold appears not as crude nuggets, but as precisely formed coins whose weight and purity establish new monetary standards. Still, true value lies not in production volume, but in quality of prosperity created. Wealth flowing from chambers carries qualities strengthening communities rather than corrupting them. Grain produced nourishes not only bodies, but souls, building physical foundations supporting spiritual development. Salt created preserves not only food, but traditions, maintaining cultural continuity across generations that might otherwise lose touch with their heritage. Gold generated facilitates exchanges building relationships, rather than merely accumulating treasure in isolated hoards. The journey back to Pohjola becomes a triumphal procession, demonstrating cooperative power of 3 heroes working in perfect harmony. Ancient songs smooth paths ahead, calling forth bridges across ravines that would otherwise block passage, and persuading fierce wildlife to stand aside rather than threatening precious cargo. Technical skills maintain delicate mechanisms despite jarring travel over rough terrain. Lemminkainen's boundless energy provides physical force needed to navigate obstacles, defeating more cautious travelers. Arrival at the ice fortress coincides with darkest night of northern winter, when sun disappears entirely below horizon and the realm of shadows claims temporary dominion over visible world. Yet presence of the mill transforms this season of despair into celebration, its gentle radiance providing light-making. Even frozen landscapes seem hospitable. Operation fills air with sounds speaking of abundance and security, promising that winter's traditional threats of starvation and cold will find no purchase in realms blessed by its presence. Luhi examines the completed creation with thoroughness of one who has learned to trust nothing, seeming too good to be true. Her ancient wisdom recognizes immediately that this exceeds original specifications, that the masterpiece represents not merely fulfillment of contract, but establishment of new possibilities for wealth and power beyond anything her realm has previously known. This will make her territory the envy of neighboring regions, a magnet for trade and alliance that could shift entire balance of northern politics. Wedding negotiations that follow reveal complex motivations, driving relationships between rulers whose decisions affect entire people's fates. Her daughter, whose beauty inspired the dangerous journey, proves to possess intelligence and character matching physical attractiveness. She understands that marriage to the southern hero will make her a bridge between realms traditionally viewing each other with suspicion and hostility. Her acceptance demonstrates wisdom, suggesting the union might achieve more than either party originally envisioned. However, celebrations marking the wedding also reveal tensions lying beneath this alliance's surface between order and chaos. Feasts following northern customs emphasize competitive consumption, contrasting sharply with southern traditions of moderation and sharing. Music accompanying dancing speaks of conquest and domination rather than harmony and cooperation. Even gifts exchanged between families carry subtle messages about power relationships and future expectations, suggesting this union will require careful maintenance to prevent becoming a source of conflict rather than cooperation. Installation in the treasury creates illusion of permanent prosperity for the northern realm, yet it also establishes foundations for future strife. Productive capacity makes territory wealthy beyond traditional dreams, but wealth without wisdom often becomes a curse, destroying what it was meant to preserve. Abundance flowing from chambers attracts attention from distant kingdoms, whose envy may prove more dangerous than their previous indifference. Before long, presence in the frozen domain creates imbalance affecting entire regional spiritual ecology. The mill was created through cooperation between heroes whose natures embody different aspects of creative force, yet now serves only interests of a realm dedicated to accumulation rather than distribution. This contradiction generates tensions manifesting as strange weather patterns, unusual animal behaviors, and dreams troubling sleep of sensitive individuals throughout northern territories. The wedding itself becomes ceremony, blending traditions from both realms while satisfying neither completely. Southern customs emphasizing voluntary nature of marriage contracts conflict with northern practices, treating such unions as alliances between power structures. Vows exchanged between bride and groom carry different meanings for participants from different cultures, creating ambiguities requiring resolution through future actions rather than present words. His new bride proves worthy of trials that brought them together, yet she also brings challenges testing his understanding of what constitutes successful partnership. Her northern heritage gives insights into magic forms, operating according to principles unfamiliar to southern practitioners. Her loyalty to homeland interests creates situations where she must choose between supporting her husband's goals and protecting her birth family's welfare. Wisdom she possesses serves both realms well, but also reveals extent to which their fundamental values remain incompatible despite surface agreements. Months following wedding demonstrate both possibilities and limitations of alliance the mill has purchased. Trade between Kalevala and the frozen realm flourishes as never before, with products providing foundation for exchanges benefiting both territories. Cultural contacts previously limited to occasional diplomatic missions expand into regular interactions, spreading knowledge and techniques across traditional boundaries. Roads between north and south carry not only merchants and goods, but also ideas and innovations enriching both civilizations. Still, these same months reveal price of prosperity built upon magical rather than natural foundations. Communities becoming dependent upon production lose skills and knowledge, previously enabling self-sufficiency through their own efforts. Abundance flowing from treasury creates expectations that may prove impossible to sustain if circumstances ever threaten operation. Most troubling, presence generates desires for similar devices among rulers whose ambitions exceed their wisdom. Seeds of future conflict begin sprouting even during apparent success following completion. Her possession of such unprecedented wealth awakens ambitions extending far beyond traditional boundaries of influence. Her advisors whisper of opportunities to expand dominion southward, using resources to fund military adventures that could reshape entire regional balance. Same abundance meant to ensure peace begins generating dreams of conquest, threatening to undo everything the alliance was intended to achieve. Väinämöinen watches these developments with growing concern, recognizing patterns suggesting his greatest triumph may become source of most dangerous challenges. The creation represents successful cooperation of three heroes, yet its current location prevents them from maintaining collaborative relationship that made construction possible. The mill belongs to the Northern Realm now, subject to her will rather than balanced judgment that guided its creation. This separation of creative achievement from creative wisdom violates principles governing healthy operation of such powerful devices. Across winter months that follow, while the magical device continues its endless grinding beneath icebound fortress, three heroes must prepare for adventures determining whether their greatest achievement becomes foundation for future glory or catalyst for ultimate destruction. What was meant to bring prosperity has succeeded beyond all expectations, yet success itself has become a problem, requiring solutions no amount of wealth can purchase. Through these trials, bonds forged between companions face their greatest test, as the very creation meant to unite them in triumph threatens to tear apart relationships that made its existence possible. The quest has reached its conclusion, but the story it began continues unfolding with consequences none of its protagonists could have foreseen. In distant lands, where sorrow takes root like poison ivy, strangling ancient oaks, a tale unfolds that will shake the foundations of both mortal and divine realms. Far from the celebrations marking new alliances between North and South, darkness gathers around a figure whose very existence embodies the cruel mockery that fate sometimes makes of noble bloodlines. This is the story of one born under cursed stars, whose life becomes a testament to how injustice, when left to fester, transforms innocent hearts into instruments of terrible vengeance. The cursed youth, known as Kullervo, emerges into a world that greets his birth, not with joy, but with the bitter recognition that old sins have come to claim their due. His father's enemies, their memories long and their hatred patient as winter ice, see in this newborn child an opportunity to balance scales that have been weighted against them for generations. What follows is not mere slavery, but a calculated campaign to destroy a soul through systematic humiliation and abuse that would break lesser spirits entirely. Grieving mothers throughout the land will later sing lamentations for this child who grows to manhood knowing only cruelty where others experience love, only commands where others hear guidance, only the lash where others feel gentle hands. His supernatural strength manifests early, a gift that in another life might have made him a great hero, but which in his circumstances becomes merely another source of fear and resentment from those who own his body but can never claim his spirit. What followed his placement in the household of his father's murderer represents one of the darkest chapters in the long history of human cruelty. Each day brings fresh humiliations, designed to break his will and transform him into the docile beast of burden his captors desire. Yet beneath the surface, compliance forced upon him by circumstances beyond his control, rage accumulates like pressure building behind a dam that must eventually burst with catastrophic force. Far from the peaceful workshops where Ilmarinen shapes metal into beautiful forms, this young man learns different lessons about the relationship between power and suffering. His hands, which might have created wonders to rival those of the divine smith himself, instead know only the weight of chains and the sting of undeserved punishment. His voice, which carries within it echoes of the same creative force that flows through Wainamoinen's songs, learns to speak only words of submission while his heart screams with unvoiced fury. The tragedy that will define his fate begins with a task that seems simple enough to merit little attention from those who assign it. His master's wife, seeking to rid herself of his brooding presence for a few hours, sends him to watch the cattle in distant pastures, where his supernatural strength might find outlet in honest labor. Yet even this humble duty becomes an occasion for cruelty, as she provides him with bread that conceals within its crust a stone sharp enough to destroy the only possession he values, the knife that represents his sole connection to the father he never knew. Still, the morning begins with something approaching hope, as solitude offers temporary respite from the constant surveillance and casual abuse that define his daily existence. Among the cattle, whose simple needs require no complex negotiations or hidden meanings, he finds a kind of peace that his human interactions never provide. The animals accept his strength without fear, respond to his commands without resentment, and offer the first uncomplicated relationships he has known since childhood's earliest memories. However, when hunger drives him to break the bread prepared by his mistress, the discovery of the hidden stone shatters more than just his blade. It destroys the last restraints that civilization and fear have placed upon his growing rage. The knife, inherited from his father, and representing his only tangible link to an identity beyond slavery, breaks against the stone with a sound that echoes through his soul, like the snapping of all bonds that have held his fury in check. Before the sun reaches its zenith, transformation begins that will turn shepherd into destroyer, victim into avenger, suffering soul into agent of justice so terrible that even the gods themselves will look away in horror. His commands to the cattle carry new tones that speak not of human authority, but of something far more primal and dangerous. The animals respond with behaviors that violate every natural law governing their species, their placid natures twisted into instruments of vengeance that match the darkness consuming their temporary master's heart. During the hours that follow, he shapes these simple beasts into weapons more terrible than any sword forged in earthly fire. Bears disguised as cattle, wolves wearing the forms of peaceful sheep, predators hidden beneath the appearances of creatures that normally flee from violence. All these he creates through arts that blur the line between magic and madness. His mistress will receive her cattle back as promised. But they will bring gifts she never expected, and surely would never have requested had she understood the true nature of the forces she was provoking. Through these dark preparations, the cursed youth experiences for the first time the intoxicating pleasure of possessing power over those who have wronged him. Yet even as he revels in the anticipation of revenge, deeper currents of tragedy flow beneath the surface of his consciousness. The very act of transformation that enables his vengeance also completes his own metamorphosis from victim to monster, from one deserving of pity to one who must be feared and ultimately destroyed. After the cattle return to their familiar pastures and his mistress approaches to complete her routine inspection, events unfold with the inexorable logic of natural disasters. Her death, torn apart by creatures she believed harmless, marks not the end of his suffering, but the beginning of a new chapter in which he discovers that revenge, however sweet its initial taste, leaves the soul hungrier than before. Each act of violence demands another. Each moment of triumph reveals new depths of emptiness that can never be filled by external destruction alone. This tragedy marks the beginning of a pattern that will repeat itself throughout his brief and terrible life. Those who wrong him suffer fates that exceed their crimes in both creativity and horror. Yet each victory leaves him more isolated, more desperately alone, more convinced that the entire world conspires against his happiness. The strength that might have made him a protector becomes instead the tool of destruction that ensures no one can ever approach him without fear. Beyond the immediate circle of his tormentors, word spreads of a figure whose very presence brings death and devastation to all who encounter him. Wise men speak in whispers of the dangers inherent in pushing human souls beyond their breaking points, of the terrible consequences that follow when justice is perverted into systematic cruelty. Yet their warnings come too late to prevent the greater catastrophe that approaches with the inevitability of winter following autumn. When darkness falls upon his life with finality that admits no hope of dawn, it comes not through external enemies, but through the discovery of truths that make all his previous sufferings seem trivial by comparison. The sister he encounters on lonely forest paths, the maiden whose beauty and grace touch something in his heart that years of abuse have not quite managed to destroy, carries within her blood the same cursed heritage that flows through his own veins. Yet even as recognition dawns with horror that stops his heart and freezes his breath in his lungs, the deed is already done. What followed represents more than mere incest. It embodies the final, devastating proof that fate has marked him for destruction from the moment of his birth. The sister, who might have been his salvation, becomes instead the instrument of his ultimate damnation. Her innocence destroyed by his ignorance, her life ended by shame that no amount of explanation can diminish. Deep within forests where ancient trees have witnessed countless tragedies, yet never one so complete in its encompassing horror, she chooses death over a life that can never again hold meaning or hope. Her body, claimed by rushing streams that carry it toward the distant sea, becomes testimony to the price exacted when human beings allow cruelty to flourish without challenge or consequence. The young man who drove her to this desperate choice stands alone beside the waters that have swallowed his last chance for redemption. Kullervo's response to this final catastrophe transcends ordinary grief to become something approaching divine madness. His rage, no longer focused on specific enemies, but extending to encompass existence itself, manifests in acts of destruction that spare neither innocent nor guilty, neither human nor animal, neither sacred nor profane. Villages disappear beneath his fury like morning mist before a hurricane, their inhabitants scattered to winds that carry the stench of smoke and death across vast distances. Among the ruins he creates through these campaigns of vengeance, one target draws his attention with magnetic force that overwhelms all other considerations. The family estate where his father once lived and died, now occupied by those who orchestrated both his enslavement and his father's murder, represents the symbolic heart of all his sufferings. Here, if anywhere, he might find the satisfaction that has eluded him through all his previous victories over lesser enemies. Still, when he finally stands before the gates that once welcomed his father home from distant travels, the young man discovers that revenge, however complete, cannot restore what has been lost or heal wounds that have scarred his soul beyond recognition. The deaths of his enemies bring no peace, only the hollow realization that hatred, once allowed to consume a human heart entirely, leaves nothing behind but ashes and the bitter taste of emptiness. However, the cursed youth possesses one more act to perform before his tragedy reaches its inevitable conclusion. The sword that serves as his constant companion, witness to all his crimes and partner in all his destructions, speaks to him with voice that cuts through the madness clouding his judgment. This blade, forged with skills that rival those of divine smiths, carries within its steel the memory of every life it has taken and every drop of blood it has shed. Before the final moment arrives, the weapon offers testimony that encompasses the full scope of his life's meaning. Its words, spoken with the authority of one who has shared every step of his journey from innocence to damnation, provide the judgment that no human court could render. The blade recognizes in its wielder a soul so completely corrupted by suffering and hatred that mercy itself would constitute a form of cruelty, allowing poison to spread further through a world that has already endured enough contamination. What followed represents not suicide, but execution, carried out by the only judge qualified to render final verdict on a life that has transcended ordinary categories of guilt and innocence. The sword, answering its master's final command, completes the circle of violence that began with his father's murder and encompassed within its circumference more death and destruction than any single human being should be capable of causing. Across the land, people speak of the terrible silence that falls when his voice is finally stilled forever. Yet this quiet brings no peace, only the uneasy recognition that some wounds cut so deeply into the fabric of existence that they can never heal completely. The legacy of his life becomes a warning that echoes through generations yet to come, reminding all who hear it of the terrible prices exacted when societies allow injustice to flourish unchecked. Far from these scenes of ultimate devastation, another tale unfolds that demonstrates how even heroes must sometimes pay prices that exceed the value of their victories. Lemminkainen, whose reckless courage has carried him safely through countless adventures, finds himself drawn once again toward the dangerous embrace of northern realms, where death waits patiently for those bold enough to challenge powers beyond mortal comprehension. This tragedy begins with rejection that wounds pride accustomed to easy conquests in matters of the heart. The maidens of the frozen domain, whose beauty first inspired his dangerous journey, prove immune to charms that have never before failed to achieve their intended effects. Their refusal cuts deeper than physical wounds, striking at the core of an identity built upon assumptions of irresistible appeal and universal desirability. Grieving for pride that has suffered mortal injury, the wild shaman responds with the sort of reckless gesture that has characterized all his previous encounters with forces greater than himself. His insults, hurled at Louhi herself with the careless confidence of one who has never learned to measure consequences before acting, cross lines that wiser men know better than to approach. The northern mistress, whose patience has limits even for those she once considered useful allies, responds with fury that makes winter storms seem gentle by comparison. Yet even as supernatural forces gather to punish his insolence, he doubles his wager against fate by embarking upon the most dangerous quest imaginable. Tuonela, the realm of shadows, where the living venture only at the price of their souls, beckons with promise of knowledge and power that might restore his wounded self-respect. The underworld offers secrets that could make him master of forces that even the northern realm would hesitate to challenge directly. Among the preparations for this ultimate adventure, signs appear that might have warned a more cautious hero of the dangers inherent in such enterprises. His protective charms, woven with love and skill by a mother whose wisdom encompasses generations of accumulated knowledge, begin to show signs of strain that speak of challenges exceeding even their considerable power. Blood appears where none should flow. Breaks occur in patterns that have held firm through countless previous trials. Deep within the realm of shadows, where the river of death flows with currents that carry more than mere liquid toward unknown destinations, he encounters guardians whose authority extends over all who dare to trespass upon forbidden ground. The ferryman who controls passage between the world of the living and the domain of the dead recognizes immediately that this visitor comes not as one appointed to cross legitimately, but as an intruder whose very presence violates fundamental laws governing the boundaries between life and death. When darkness finally claims him, torn apart by forces that brook no interference with their eternal vigil, his body feeds the black waters that flow through the heart of the underworld. Yet death, for one whose mother possesses both the knowledge and the determination to challenge even the fundamental laws of existence, proves to be merely an interruption rather than an ending to his story. Still, in chambers far from the realm of shadows, a mother receives warnings that send her forth on the most desperate quest any parent has ever undertaken. The journey she makes between the world of the living and the domain of the dead transcends ordinary heroism to become something approaching divine madness, driven by love that refuses to accept limits imposed by natural law or supernatural authority. Through arts that blur the line between healing and resurrection, between medicine and miracle, she gathers the scattered fragments of her son's body from currents that have distributed them throughout the underworld's vast domain. Each piece must be reclaimed through negotiations with powers that have no reason to show mercy and every incentive to guard their treasures jealously. Her success demonstrates that determination, powered by parental love, can achieve results that armies and magic alike would find impossible. However, when breath finally returns to lungs that had forgotten their purpose and heartbeat resumes in a chest that had known the cold stillness of absolute ending, the victory over death itself carries prices that only become apparent as time passes. The young man who returns from the underworld bears within his renewed flesh knowledge of the dark realm that no living being should possess, memories of visions too terrible for sharing with those who have never tasted the ultimate defeat. Before long, these experiences begin to manifest as changes in behavior that trouble even those who love him most. His laughter sometimes carries echoes of sounds that belong only in the realm of shadows. His eyes occasionally reflect depths that speak of visions too dark for mortal understanding. The boundary between life and death has been crossed twice, and each crossing leaves marks upon the soul that making the journey possesses. Yet even as these transformations work their slow changes upon his essential nature, the bonds between the three heroes remain strong enough to withstand trials that would shatter lesser friendships. The pattern of their cooperation, wisdom tempered by craft, craft inspired by action, action guided by wisdom, continues to provide the foundation upon which their greatest adventures rest. Their brotherhood, forged in the fires of individual trials and tempered by shared understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses, prepares them for the ultimate test that approaches with the inevitability of winter following autumn. What followed these individual tragedies represents not ending, but transformation, not defeat, but preparation for trials that will test everything they have learned about courage, friendship, and the terrible prices that heroes must sometimes pay for their victories. The stage is set for adventures that will determine whether the bonds forged between them can survive challenges that threaten to tear apart the very fabric of existence itself. As winter tightens its brutal hold and the northern world sinks into months of night, three heroes meet where flames cast shifting light on walls shaped from the living rock. The weight of destiny presses upon their shoulders like snow accumulating on ancient pines, each flake adding to a burden that threatens to break even the strongest branches. Around them, the very air thrums with tension that speaks of approaching conflicts that will test every bond they have forged and every principle they hold sacred. What began as individual quests for glory and companionship has evolved into something far more complex and dangerous than any of them originally envisioned. The mill that was meant to bring prosperity to the northern realm has instead become a source of imbalance that threatens the stability of all lands touched by its influence. Wainamoinen, whose wisdom spans centuries of careful observation, recognizes patterns in recent events that suggest the careful equilibrium between order and chaos stands in greater peril than at any time since creation's early days. Far beneath Louhi's ice-bound fortress, the magical device continues its endless grinding, producing wealth that flows like a river of golden abundance through chambers that can barely contain its output. Yet this prosperity comes at a price that grows heavier with each passing season. The northern mistress, intoxicated by riches beyond her wildest dreams, has begun to see her windfall not as blessing to be shared, but as weapon to be wielded against all who might challenge her supremacy. The three heroes understand that their greatest creation has become their most dangerous enemy, not through any flaw in its construction, but through the corruption that unlimited power inevitably brings to those who possess it without wisdom to guide its use. The device they forged through cooperation and mutual trust now serves interests that threaten to tear apart the very foundations upon which civilized existence rests. Still burning within their hearts is the memory of what the mill was meant to accomplish. A bridge between realms that had known only suspicion and hostility, a demonstration that different peoples could work together for mutual benefit. Instead, it has become a monument to the age-old truth that power without restraint transforms even the noblest intentions into instruments of oppression and domination. However, the decision to reclaim what they created comes not from anger or disappointment, but from recognition that some responsibilities transcend personal comfort and safety. The ancient singer, whose voice shaped the world itself from primordial chaos, understands that creative power carries with it eternal obligation to ensure that what is made serves purposes worthy of the effort required to bring it into being. Across the vast distances that separate Kalevala from the frozen domain, messengers carry word of strange disturbances that confirm the heroes' worst fears about their masterpiece's current influence. Crops fail in regions that should know abundance, livestock sicken without apparent cause, and children are born bearing marks that speak of imbalances in the fundamental forces governing life itself. The mill's presence in the northern realm creates disruptions that ripple outward like waves from a stone dropped into still pools. Before dawn breaks on the day chosen for their most perilous adventure, final preparations occupy every moment, with activities that blend practical planning with ritual observances designed to invoke protection from powers beyond mortal comprehension. Weapons receive blessings that will enable them to strike at supernatural enemies. Ships undergo modifications that will allow them to sail through more than merely physical seas, and provisions are gathered that will sustain not only bodies, but souls during trials that may extend far beyond ordinary endurance. During these crucial hours, each hero confronts private doubts and fears that no amount of courage can entirely banish. They understand that success will require not merely strength or skill, but perfect cooperation between personalities that have sometimes clashed even during less dangerous enterprises. The theft they plan will test every aspect of their brotherhood, while pitting them against forces that have had years to prepare defenses around their most precious possession. Through consultations with sources of wisdom, both ancient and modern, they learn details about the mill's current location that reveal the magnitude of the challenge they have chosen to accept. The device rests in chambers protected by more than mere locks and guards. It lies at the heart of magical defenses that respond to threats with power, drawn from the very foundations of the Northern Realm itself. After careful consideration of all alternatives, they conclude that stealth rather than open assault offers their only hope of success. The great kantele, that instrument of such surpassing beauty that its music can lull even supernatural guardians into peaceful slumber, becomes the key around which their entire strategy revolves. Crafted from materials gathered from Vellamo's undersea palace, this harp possesses power to calm the most savage spirits and soothe the most vigilant watchers. This theft must unfold like a song itself, each movement flowing naturally into the next, without jarring notes that might awaken opposition before the crucial moment arrives. The eternal singer's voice will provide the melody that guides their approach, while his companions contribute harmonies that enhance rather than compete with the central theme of their carefully orchestrated performance. When morning arrives with light that seems reluctant to penetrate the gathering storm clouds, their vessel cuts through seas that respond to more than wind and current alone. The ship that carries them toward their destiny has been modified with techniques that blur the boundary between engineering and magic, its hull strengthened to withstand pressures that would crush ordinary craft, its sails woven from materials that catch supernatural winds as easily as natural breezes. Among the preparations that occupy their journey northward, each hero contributes skills that complement rather than duplicate those of his companions. Ilmarinen's technical expertise maintains systems that operate according to principles unknown to conventional shipbuilding, while the wild shaman's boundless energy provides the physical force needed to handle rigging that responds to willpower as much as muscle. Their cooperation during these preliminary tasks establishes rhythms that will prove crucial when split-second timing determines the difference between triumph and catastrophe. Deep within the belly of their enchanted vessel, the great kantele rests in cushioned chambers where its delicate mechanisms remain protected from the jarring motion of travel through turbulent seas. This instrument represents more than mere tool. It embodies the power of harmony to overcome discord, of beauty to triumph over brutality, of patient skill to succeed where hasty force would surely fail. Yet even as they sail toward confrontation with the Northern Realm's mightiest defenses, larger forces gather that threaten to overwhelm their carefully laid plans before implementation becomes possible. Storms that seem guided by malevolent intelligence track their progress across seas that grow more treacherous with each league they travel northward. These tempests carry within their winds voices that speak warnings in languages older than human memory. Counseling retreat before pride leads them all to destruction. Overhead, the aurora borealis paints the night sky with colors that spell doom for those who can read the ancient script written in shifting curtains of celestial fire. These lights, which normally herald wonder and beauty, now carry messages that speak of cosmic forces aligning against their enterprise. The very heavens seem to warn them that some treasures are too well guarded to be stolen, some powers too great to be challenged by mortal heroes regardless of their courage or determination. Beyond the visible horizon, where the frozen realm's borders blur into regions that exist partially outside normal geography, watchposts maintained by supernatural guardians begin to detect the approach of vessels that do not belong in these waters. Ancient agreements between realms that have prevented open warfare for generations now strain under pressures that threaten to snap bonds that once seemed unbreakable. This theft, should it succeed, will shatter more than mere treaties. It will demonstrate that no power, however great, can claim permanent dominion over treasures that rightfully belong to all who contributed to their creation. The mill was forged through cooperation between heroes whose skills represented the best that southern civilization could offer. Yet it now serves interests that pervert its original purpose into something approaching blasphemy. When darkness falls with finality that seems to promise eternal night, their ship approaches shores where ice never melts and shadows gather with malevolent purpose. The fortress that houses their objective rises from bedrock like a cancer growing from the heart of the earth itself, its towers piercing a sky that weeps frozen tears upon all who dare to challenge the authority of those who dwell within its walls. Among the defenses they must overcome, the most dangerous prove to be not physical barriers, but spiritual obstacles that assault the very foundations of their determination. Voices whisper from the darkness, speaking words that reveal shameful secrets from their past adventures, questioning the righteousness of their cause, suggesting that retreat offers the only honorable course of action available to heroes who claim to serve justice rather than mere personal ambition. Still burning in their hearts, however, is the memory of what their creation was meant to accomplish, and how its current misuse violates every principle that guided its construction. The device they forged was intended to demonstrate that cooperation between different peoples could produce results that exceeded anything achievable through conquest or coercion. Instead, it has become a tool for accumulating power that serves no purpose beyond feeding the endless appetite of those who mistake possession for achievement. However, the moment of truth arrives with suddenness that catches even their enhanced senses by surprise. Guards who should have detected their approach continue their patrols without sign that they have noticed the presence of intruders whose very existence threatens everything they have sworn to protect. The great kantele works its magic through melodies that seem to arise naturally from the night itself, its songs indistinguishable from wind singing through ice-covered stones, or waves lapping against frozen shores. Across courtyards where armed sentries pace routes that have been unchanged for generations, the three heroes move with coordination that reflects years of shared adventures and mutual trust. Each knows instinctively where his companions will be at any given moment. Each anticipates the needs of the others before those needs become urgent. Each contributes to their collective effort without requiring detailed instructions or elaborate signals. Before the guards can shake off the supernatural slumber that holds them in its gentle embrace, the heroes reach chambers where the mill continues its endless grinding beneath vaults that have never before been breached by unauthorized visitors. The device sits precisely where they expected to find it, yet its appearance shocks them with evidence of how possession by the Northern Realm has changed its fundamental nature. During the months of its residence in these chambers, the mill has grown beyond its original dimensions, fed by forces that have enhanced its productive capacity far beyond anything its creators ever intended. tendrils of power extend from its central mechanisms into the very foundations of the fortress itself, creating connections that make separation seem not merely difficult, but potentially catastrophic for both the device and the structure that houses it. Through techniques that blend careful engineering with intuitive understanding of supernatural forces, Ilmarinen begins the delicate work of disconnecting systems that have grown together, like vines intertwining around a garden trellis. Each connection severed requires perfect timing and absolute precision, for even minor errors could trigger defensive responses that would awaken the entire fortress and bring overwhelming force to bear against their small party. After what seems like hours, but measures mere minutes by any conventional timepiece, the mill stands free of entangling influences and ready for transport to more worthy custodians. Yet even as they prepare to claim their prize, sounds from distant chambers warn that their presence has finally been detected by guardians whose vigilance cannot be entirely overcome by even the most powerful music. This theft must now become a race between heroes who carry precious cargo and forces that will stop at nothing to prevent the loss of wealth that has become the foundation of northern supremacy. The mill, despite its supernatural origins, proves surprisingly heavy when disconnected from the power sources that previously supported its operation. Moving it from its chamber to their waiting ship will require strength and endurance that pushes even their enhanced capabilities toward their limits. When morning breaks over scenes of desperate flight and equally desperate pursuit, the contest that began as theft evolves into something approaching open warfare between realms that have maintained uneasy peace for generations. Louhi herself, awakened by alarms that signal the loss of her greatest treasure, emerges from chambers where she has been contemplating dreams of conquest that the mill's wealth was meant to make possible. Among the transformations that rage and desperation work upon the northern mistress, none proves more terrible than her assumption of forms that reveal the true extent of her supernatural nature. Wings that span distances measured in miles lift her above the ice fortress with grace that belies their enormous size, while talons sharp enough to rend stone close around weapons forged from materials that exist only in nightmares. She becomes a living storm that pursues the fleeing heroes with fury that makes Arctic tempests seem gentle by comparison. Deep within their enchanted vessel, the three heroes discover that success in theft merely marks the beginning of trials that will test everything they have learned about cooperation under pressure. The mill, now free from the connections that anchored it to the Northern Realm's power grid, begins to exhibit behaviors that suggest it recognizes the change in its circumstances and approves of the liberation its creators have accomplished. Yet even as their prize demonstrates its pleasure at being reunited with those who understand its true purpose, the pursuit that follows their escape assumes proportions that threaten to drag both realms into conflicts that could reshape the entire balance of regional power. What began as a carefully planned theft has become a chase that spans distances measured in degrees of latitude, with consequences that extend far beyond the immediate fate of one magical device. Overhead, the transformed northern mistress gains steadily on prey that cannot match her supernatural speed, despite all the enhancements their vessel has received. Her cries, audible across vast distances, carry promises of vengeance that make previous threats seem trivial by comparison. The theft of her greatest treasure has awakened aspects of her nature that have slumbered since the world was young, releasing powers that recognize no law, save the imperative to reclaim what has been taken. Beyond the immediate drama of pursuit and flight, larger forces align themselves for conflicts that will determine whether the mill serves purposes worthy of its creator's intentions or becomes merely another prize in struggles between powers that care nothing for the welfare of those they claim to rule. The stage is set for confrontations that will test the strength of the device itself and reveal whether the cooperation that enabled its creation can survive the trials that follow its liberation. What followed represents more than mere chase across hostile seas. It becomes a test of principles that will determine the future course of relationships between realms that must either learn to coexist peacefully or resign themselves to conflicts that could destroy everything their ancestors built through centuries of patient effort. The mill they fought to reclaim carries within its mechanisms not merely the power to produce wealth, but the potential to demonstrate that justice sometimes requires heroes to risk everything they hold dear, in service of ideals that transcend personal safety or comfort. Amid waters tainted by fragments of hope and broken oaths, the true price of the battle becomes clear, one that stretches far beyond the wreckage of a single wonder. The mill that once represented cooperation between realms lies scattered across ocean depths, where currents carry its remnants toward distant shores, each piece still humming with residual power that will enrich whatever soil eventually claims it as treasure. Yet victory achieved through such sacrifice tastes bitter in the mouths of heroes who understand that some triumphs extract prices too heavy for mortal hearts to bear easily. What remained of their carefully crafted vessel drifts upon seas that reflect a sky suddenly stripped of familiar lights. The sun, which had warmed the faces of countless generations since creation's earliest days, no longer follows its accustomed path across the heavens. The moon, whose gentle radiance had guided lovers through romantic encounters and shepherds through dark pastures, hides behind clouds that seem to weep for the cosmic order that recent events have shattered beyond easy repair. Far above the ocean's troubled surface, darkness gathers with malevolent purpose as Luhi demonstrates the true extent of her supernatural powers. Her rage, no longer focused merely on recovering stolen property, has expanded to encompass vengeance against the very forces that allow life to flourish in realms beyond her direct control. The Northern Mistress has learned that if she cannot possess the source of endless prosperity, then no one will enjoy the basic blessings that make existence bearable. The shattered fragments of their great prize continue to sing as they sink through liquid depths that have never before received gifts of such surpassing magical potency. Each piece carries within its crystalline structure memories of the cooperation that brought it into being, and echoes of the purposes it was meant to serve. Where these remnants finally come to rest, the ocean floor itself begins to bloom with abundance that will eventually surface as unprecedented harvests in distant lands, whose inhabitants will never know the source of their sudden good fortune. Still echoing across vast distances, the sounds of cosmic disruption announce to all who have ears to hear that fundamental changes have torn through the fabric of existence itself. Birds fall silent in forests that have never known such profound darkness, while animals gather in nervous groups that speak of instinctive recognition that the natural order has suffered damage that may prove irreparable. Even the winds seem uncertain of their proper directions, circling aimlessly like lost children seeking guidance that no longer exists. However, the three heroes who float upon wreckage that represents both their greatest triumph and their most devastating defeat refuse to surrender to despair that would be entirely justified by their circumstances. Wainamoinen, whose voice has shaped reality since the world's birth, understands that creation's work never truly ends, but merely transforms into new challenges that require fresh applications of ancient wisdom. The darkness that surrounds them represents not conclusion, but opportunity for demonstrating that mortal determination can overcome even supernatural malevolence. Across the vast distances that separate their current position from the familiar shores of home, word spreads of the catastrophe that has befallen the cosmic order. Farmers wake to find their fields shrouded in perpetual twilight that makes it impossible to distinguish morning from evening or summer from winter. Fishermen cast nets into seas that no longer sparkle with reflected sunlight, while hunters track prey through forests where shadows have become so deep that familiar paths disappear into mazes of confusion and uncertainty. Before succumbing to the temptation to blame themselves for consequences that extend far beyond anything they could have foreseen, the heroes recognize that their struggle has entered a new phase that will require different strategies and perhaps even greater sacrifices than those already made. The battle they thought they had won through clever theft and narrow escape has revealed itself as merely the opening movement in a conflict that threatens the survival of everything they hold dear. During the long hours that follow their realization of how completely the Northern Mistress has retaliated for their success, each hero confronts private doubts about whether their actions have served justice or merely satisfied pride that refused to accept the loss of their creation to unworthy hands. The darkness that now blankets the world stands as testimony to the terrible truth that even righteous intentions can produce results that exceed the worst fears of those who act upon them. Through conversations that blend confession with planning, they arrive at understanding that redemption for their role in current catastrophes must be sought through actions rather than words, through creation rather than destruction. The eternal singer, whose music helped shape the cosmos from primordial chaos, begins to contemplate melodies that might restore what supernatural vengeance has stolen from innocent populations who played no part in the conflicts between heroes and the Northern Realm. After careful consideration of alternatives that range from direct assault to elaborate negotiations, they conclude that their best hope lies in demonstrating that creative power, guided by wisdom, can overcome even the most devastating expressions of supernatural fury. If Luhi has stolen light from the heavens, then they must forge new sources of illumination that will prove immune to her influence, while providing the guidance that mortal creatures require to navigate existence successfully. This process begins with songs that call upon forces even older than the Northern Mistress herself, powers that remember the world's birth and understand the fundamental principles underlying cosmic order. The eternal singer's voice rises across waters that have grown still as death, carrying melodies that penetrate darkness with authority that predates any conflict between individual realms or personalities. When morning should arrive, but fails to bring its accustomed brightness, the first notes of creation ring out across a world that waits in desperate silence for signs that hope has not been permanently extinguished. These sounds, while familiar to those who remember the ancient stories, carry new harmonies that speak of lessons learned through suffering and wisdom earned through accepting responsibility for consequences that extend far beyond original intentions. Among the techniques that prove most effective in this unprecedented crisis, the heroes discover that cooperation remains their greatest strength, even when circumstances seem designed to tear apart the bonds that unite them. Each contributes skills that complement rather than compete with those of his companions, while their shared determination multiplies the effectiveness of individual efforts beyond anything they could achieve through isolated action. Deep within the forge of his imagination, Ilmarinen begins to design celestial lights that will surpass even the originals in their capacity to warm hearts and illuminate paths that lead toward hope rather than despair. These new luminaries will incorporate lessons learned from their recent trials, embodying resilience that makes them immune to theft, while maintaining the beauty that makes existence worthwhile for those who depend upon their guidance. Yet even as plans take shape for addressing the most immediate consequences of their conflict with the Northern Realm, larger questions arise about the fundamental nature of heroism. and the responsibilities that accompany power sufficient to reshape the world according to personal vision. The mill they created and subsequently liberated was meant to serve all people equally, yet its very existence generated conflicts that have caused suffering far exceeding any benefits it might have provided. Beyond the technical challenges involved in forging new celestial bodies capable of replacing those stolen through supernatural vengeance, the heroes must grapple with philosophical problems that have no easy solutions. Their actions, however well-intentioned, have demonstrated that even cooperation between the most skillful and wise individuals can produce results that threaten the welfare of innocent populations who never consented to become participants in conflicts between powerful forces. This recognition leads them toward understanding that true heroism requires not merely the courage to act according to personal convictions, but the wisdom to accept limitations that prevent individual will from overriding the needs of larger communities. The songs that will restore light to the world must incorporate acknowledgement of mistakes made, as well as hopes for future improvement, creating harmonies that admit fallibility while maintaining determination to serve purposes greater than personal glory. When darkness reaches its deepest point and despair threatens to overwhelm even the strongest spirits, breakthrough comes not through force or cleverness, but through surrender to principles that have guided existence since creation's earliest moments. The eternal singer's voice, joined by those of his companions, creates music that transcends individual personalities, to become expression of universal longing for light, warmth, and the simple beauty that makes life worth living, despite its inevitable sufferings. Among the wonders that emerge from this collaboration between mortal determination and cosmic forces sympathetic to sincere repentance, new lights begin to appear in skies that had seemed permanently shrouded in darkness. These luminaries, while different in detail from their predecessors, provide the essential services that enable crops to grow, lovers to meet, and children to play in safety, rather than cowering in shadows that seem to promise only danger and confusion. Still glowing with energies that speak of recent birth, rather than ancient establishment, these replacement celestial bodies demonstrate that creation's work continues despite temporary setbacks, and that wisdom learned through failure often proves more valuable than easy successes. The sun that now rises in the east carries within its radiance acknowledgement of costs paid for current blessings, while the moon that illuminates night skies bears marks that remind observers of the vigilance required to maintain cosmic order against forces that would reduce everything to chaos. However, the restoration of light to the world represents only partial solution to problems that extend far beyond mere absence of illumination. The mill whose fragments now enrich ocean floors was meant to demonstrate that cooperation between different peoples could produce benefits exceeding anything achievable through conquest or competition. Its destruction has eliminated not merely a source of wealth, but a symbol of possibility that inspired hope in populations that rarely experienced reasons for optimism. Across the lands that had begun to prosper through exchanges made possible by the device's productivity, economic systems collapse as traders abandon routes that no longer connect sources of abundance with markets hungry for goods that can no longer be produced in sufficient quantities. Villages that had grown accustomed to importing necessities from distant regions must rediscover techniques for achieving self-sufficiency that their grandparents knew, but that recent generations have forgotten through reliance on external sources. Before these secondary consequences of their conflict with the Northern Realm can produce famine and social disorder that might prove even more destructive than supernatural vengeance, the three heroes embark upon missions that will test their individual capabilities as thoroughly as previous adventures challenged their collective strength. Each must travel to different regions where specific skills are needed to address particular aspects of the crisis their actions have precipitated. During these separate journeys, they discover that redemption for past mistakes requires not merely acknowledgement of errors, but active engagement in tasks that serve others, rather than satisfying personal ambitions. The eternal singer's voice, which once shaped continents and called forth forests, now turns to humbler work of teaching songs that enable communities to coordinate efforts more effectively. His melodies provide frameworks for cooperation that replace the material abundance the mill once supplied with social cohesion that proves equally valuable for ensuring survival and prosperity. Through workshops established in villages that have never before hosted visitors of such distinguished reputation, Ilmarinen shares techniques that enable local craftsmen to achieve results that approach the quality of products that once flowed from supernatural sources. His knowledge, accumulated through centuries of patient experimentation, becomes curriculum for schools that transform ordinary workers into artists capable of creating beauty that enriches life, even when material resources remain limited. After years of adventures that emphasized individual prowess and personal glory, Lemminkainen discovers satisfaction in activities that contribute to collective welfare, without providing opportunities for spectacular displays of supernatural ability. His energy, previously channeled into quests that served primarily to test his own capabilities, finds new outlets in projects that improve conditions for entire populations while teaching him lessons about the relationship between true strength and service to others. Yet even as these individual efforts begin to heal some of the damage caused by recent conflicts, larger patterns emerge that suggest the world has entered a new phase of development that will require different approaches to problems that previous generations solved through reliance on magical solutions. The devices and techniques that served their ancestors well prove inadequate for addressing challenges that arise when supernatural forces withdraw from active participation in mortal affairs. Beyond the immediate tasks of restoration and reconstruction, the heroes begin to perceive their role in preparing younger generations for responsibilities that will fall upon them when current leaders can no longer provide guidance and protection. The songs they compose during this period incorporate not merely instructions for practical tasks, but wisdom about facing adversity with courage, accepting limitation with grace, and finding meaning in service to purposes greater than individual ambition. This transition from active adventure to contemplative teaching marks the beginning of transformation that will eventually lead them toward their final destiny as figures who bridge the gap between mythic past and uncertain future. Their stories, preserved in verses that survive long after their physical presence has departed, become sources of inspiration for generations that must create their own legends, through deeds that demonstrate the eternal relevance of values they embodied through their struggles and sacrifices. When twilight approaches that speaks not of temporary darkness, but of permanent change in the cosmic order that has governed existence since creation's dawn, the three heroes prepare for farewells that will separate them not merely in space, but in the very nature of their being. Their work in the world of physical action nears completion, yet their influence will continue through the echoes their voices leave in hearts that remember their songs and minds that cherish their example. Among the preparations for departure that occupies their final days together, each hero creates legacy that will preserve his essential contribution to the great work of maintaining cosmic order against forces that would reduce everything to chaos. These gifts to future generations incorporate not merely knowledge and techniques, but qualities of character that enable ordinary individuals to accomplish extraordinary deeds when circumstances demand heroic responses to seemingly impossible challenges. What followed represents not ending, but transformation, not defeat, but graduation, to different forms of service that transcend the limitations of mortal existence while maintaining connection to the world they help shape through their adventures. The songs they leave behind carry power to inspire, comfort, and guide, long after their voices have merged with the eternal music that flows through all creation, like blood through the veins of some vast, benevolent being, whose heartbeat provides rhythm for the cosmic dance that never ends. While others sit by firelight, trading stories to keep old heroics alive, three travelers stand on the threshold of journeys that cross into the unseen, where myths take shape and deeper truths lie hidden. The time has come for farewells that mark not merely the end of shared adventures, but the transition from mythic age to historical period, from era of direct divine intervention to time when humanity must find its own path through challenges that await no external salvation. What began as individual quests for glory and companionship has evolved through trials and triumphs into something far greater than any of them originally envisioned. Their brotherhood, forged in the fires of impossible challenges and tempered by shared understanding of both victory and defeat, stands as testament to the truth that cooperation can achieve results that surpass the wildest dreams of those who attempt great deeds in isolation. Yet even the strongest bonds must sometimes yield to destiny's call toward different forms of service. Far beyond the familiar landscapes where their adventures unfolded, changes gather that herald transformation of the cosmic order itself. The age of heroes who could reshape reality through songs and forge miracles through skillful craftsmanship draws toward its close, yielding to an epoch when ordinary humans must discover within themselves the strength and wisdom that previous generations found through communion with supernatural forces. The ancient singer, whose voice helped shape the world from primordial chaos, feels within his ageless bones the approach of transition that will require him to set aside active involvement in mortal affairs. Wainamoinen understands that his continued presence would prevent younger generations from developing the independence and self-reliance they will need to navigate challenges that await them in times to come. His departure becomes gift as much as loss, creating space for human potential to flourish without dependence on external sources of power, still resonating through chambers where he contemplates the nature of endings and beginnings. Melodies emerge that will become his final compositions for earthly audiences. These songs incorporate everything he has learned through countless centuries of observation and participation in the great work of maintaining cosmic order against forces that would reduce all existence to chaos. Each note carries within it wisdom earned through suffering, hope tempered by experience, and love that encompasses not merely individual companions, but all living beings who struggle to find meaning in circumstances beyond their control. However, the decision to depart does not come easily to one whose entire existence has been devoted to serving purposes that transcend personal comfort or satisfaction. The world he helped create remains fragile, threatened by forces both external and internal that could undo everything accomplished through generations of patient effort. Yet he recognizes that true leadership sometimes requires stepping aside to allow others to assume responsibilities that continued guidance from above would prevent them from accepting fully. Across the vast territories where his influence has shaped development for ages beyond counting, preparation begins for governance that must function without direct intervention from supernatural authority. Communities that have grown accustomed to receiving guidance through songs that carry divine wisdom must learn to find answers within their own collective intelligence and accumulated experience. The transition will prove difficult, yet it represents a necessary step toward maturity that all civilizations must eventually achieve. Before his final departure, The eternal singer creates monuments that will preserve essential knowledge for generations that must navigate existence without access to the oral traditions that have transmitted wisdom through personal contact between teacher and student. These repositories take forms that blend practical instruction with artistic beauty, ensuring that future seekers will find both information and inspiration in sources that survive long after their creator's voice has merged with the eternal music that flows through all creation. During the construction of these lasting gifts to posterity, each element receives attention that reflects understanding of how knowledge must be preserved when direct transmission becomes impossible. Stone carvings that record fundamental principles resist weathering that would destroy less durable materials, while hidden chambers protect scrolls whose contents provide detailed guidance for addressing challenges that arise with predictable regularity throughout the cycles of human development. Through techniques that blur the boundary between craftsmanship and magic, Ilmarinen contributes to these preservation efforts by creating tools and devices that will enable future generations to achieve results approaching those accomplished through supernatural intervention. His workshops produce instruments whose use requires no special powers beyond patience and dedication, yet whose operation yields outcomes that seem miraculous to those who have never witnessed the marriage of deep knowledge with skillful application. After years devoted to preparation for a world that must function without their active participation, the divine smith reaches understanding that his greatest contribution lies not in creating more wonders, but in ensuring that ordinary craftsmen can achieve excellence through techniques that depend upon human skill rather than supernatural assistance. His final forges produce not magical artifacts, but improved versions of common tools whose enhanced effectiveness will multiply the capabilities of those who inherit them. This process of transition reveals itself as form of resurrection that transforms endings into beginnings, departures into arrivals at new levels of understanding and capability. What appears to represent loss of supernatural support actually creates opportunities for human potential to express itself in ways that continued dependence would prevent. The hero's withdrawal from active involvement becomes catalyst for developments that exceed anything their direct intervention could accomplish. When darkness gathers for the last time around council fires, where the three companions share memories of adventures that span centuries of shared effort, each recognizes that their influence will continue through channels more subtle, but perhaps more powerful than direct action ever provided. The stories that preserve memory of their deeds carry within them instructions for achieving greatness that transcend specific historical circumstances while remaining relevant to all who face seemingly impossible challenges. Among the legacies they leave behind, none proves more valuable than the example of cooperation that enabled them to achieve results that would have been impossible for any individual working alone. Their brotherhood demonstrates that differences in personality, approach, and area of expertise become sources of strength rather than division when united by shared commitment to purposes greater than personal advancement or recognition. Deep within the consciousness of communities they have served, patterns established through their influence continue to operate long after their physical presence has departed. Songs that teach cooperation echo in the voices of children who have never heard the original melodies, while techniques developed through their innovations appear in workshops whose operators learn them through chains of transmission that stretch back to sources they cannot identify, but somehow trust implicitly. Yet even as they prepare for departure that will separate them from direct involvement in mortal affairs, each hero understands that their essential nature prohibits complete withdrawal from service to the cosmic order that gave their existence meaning. The forms their influence takes will change, becoming more subtle, but not necessarily less effective than the dramatic interventions that characterized their heroic period. Beyond the immediate concerns of ensuring continuity for communities that have depended upon their guidance, larger questions arise about the fundamental direction of cosmic development itself. The age that approaches will test whether the principles they embodied through their adventures possess sufficient strength to survive in environments where supernatural enforcement becomes impossible, and human choice determines the balance between order and chaos. This departure marks transition from mythic time, when heroes could reshape reality through force of will and divine favor, to historical period when progress depends upon accumulated effort by countless individuals whose names may never be remembered, but whose contributions prove essential for maintaining civilization against forces that constantly threaten to reduce everything to barbarism and confusion. From distant shores, where the eternal singer constructs his final vessel, sounds carry across waters that reflect skies painted with colors that exist only during moments of supreme transition. The boat that will bear him toward horizons that exist beyond geographical boundaries takes shape through techniques that blend ancient craftsmanship with innovations developed through recent trials. This craft represents not merely means of transportation, but symbol of journey toward understanding that transcends physical movement through space. Among the materials incorporated into the vessel's construction, each element carries significance that extends far beyond its practical function. Copper that forms the hull speaks of durability that survives corrosion by time and weather, while silver fittings reflect light that guides travelers through darkness toward destinations that justify the hardships endured during passage. The cantilé that accompanies him preserves within its strings the essence of every song he has ever composed, ensuring that his music will continue to inspire long after his voice has joined the eternal chorus. Still echoing across territories where his influence shaped development for countless generations, his final songs create resonances that will persist in hearts and minds that never directly experienced their source. These melodies establish patterns that enable communities to maintain harmony despite differences that might otherwise produce conflict, while providing frameworks for cooperation that transcend boundaries of culture, language, and traditional allegiance. However, the moment of departure arrives not with fanfare or elaborate ceremony, but with quiet recognition that all necessary preparations have reached completion. The vessel that awaits him bears not only his physical presence, but the accumulated wisdom of experiences that span the entire period from creation's earliest days to the threshold of humanity's independent maturity. His journey represents not retreat, but advancement, to forms of service that operate through influence rather than intervention. Across waters that separate present reality from future possibility, his craft moves with grace that suggests propulsion by forces deeper than wind or current. The copper hull cuts through waves that carry messages between realms, while silver fittings catch and reflect light that speaks of destinations beyond the horizon of ordinary vision. Behind him, the shores that witnessed his greatest triumphs and most devastating defeats fade into memory that will be preserved in stories rather than direct experience. Before the final moment when distance transforms his vessel from visible reality into legend that lives in the realm of eternal possibility, his voice rises one last time in song that encompasses everything he hopes future generations will remember about the principles that guided his adventures. This melody incorporates not instructions for specific actions, but understanding of the relationship between individual choice and cosmic order that enables ordinary humans to achieve extraordinary results when circumstances demand heroic responses. During the years that follow his departure, evidence accumulates that his influence continues through channels more subtle, but not less effective than direct intervention ever provided. Communities that learned cooperation through his example discover solutions to problems that would have defeated their ancestors, while individuals who absorbed his teachings about the relationship between wisdom and courage find strength to face challenges that exceed their apparent capabilities. Through processes that blur the boundary between natural development and supernatural guidance, the knowledge he preserved in various forms begins to influence events in ways that demonstrate the persistence of his essential contribution to the ongoing work of maintaining cosmic order. Songs that seemed merely entertainment reveal themselves as repositories of practical wisdom, while tools that appeared purely functional prove capable of achieving results that approach the miraculous. After generations have passed since his physical departure from the realm of direct human interaction, his presence continues to manifest through the voices of storytellers who preserve memory of adventures that transcend historical fact, to become sources of inspiration for all who seek to understand the relationship between individual effort and universal purpose. These narratives carry within them instructions for achieving greatness that remain relevant regardless of the specific challenges each generation must face. Yet even as his legend grows through retelling that adds new dimensions to basic historical facts, the essential truths he embodied through his adventures remain constant across all variations of detail and interpretation. His example demonstrates that wisdom guided by compassion can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, while cooperation based on mutual respect achieves results that surpass anything individual effort could accomplish alone. Beyond the immediate impact of stories that preserve memory of specific deeds, his influence operates through patterns established in the fundamental structure of reality itself. The cosmic order he helped maintain continues to provide frameworks within which human development can proceed toward destinations that fulfill the potential embedded in consciousness since creation's earliest moments. His departure marks not ending, but graduation to forms of service that transcend the limitations of physical presence, while maintaining essential connection to the work of ensuring that existence continues to move toward greater rather than lesser expressions of truth, beauty, and goodness. When silence finally claims the last echoes of his voice from shores where mortals gather to share stories that connect present experience with eternal wisdom, that quiet becomes not absence, but presence transformed into forms that speak more directly to hearts and minds, prepared to receive guidance through recognition rather than instruction. The world he leaves behind bears within it everything necessary for continued development toward destinations that justify all the struggles and sacrifices required for their achievement. Among the countless individuals whose lives he touched through direct contact or influence, transmitted through intervening generations, each carries within them sparks of the fire that animated his greatest achievements. These fragments of inspiration, when combined through cooperative effort, guided by wisdom, he helped establish, prove capable of generating light sufficient to illuminate paths toward futures that honor both his legacy and the independent potential of humanity itself. What followed represents not conclusion, but transformation of the relationship between divine wisdom and human aspiration, from dependence to partnership, from instruction to collaboration, in the great work of ensuring that existence continues to evolve toward greater expressions of everything that makes life worth living, despite its inevitable challenges and sorrows. His story ends not with departure, but with integration into the eternal narrative that encompasses all stories, while transcending the limitations that define individual adventures, within the larger cosmic drama that never reaches final conclusion, but continues to unfold through the choices and actions of all who inherit the responsibility for shaping reality according to principles that honor both truth and love.